So, ladies and gentlemen, we have another contender for most ridiculous royal story of the week. And to be fair, I've got to put out a disclaimer. This was a tweet, but it was translated from another publication that was written in Spanish. And I believe that the publication may not be real. It may not have any real sources, but they actually name a source. They name a source. They name a cleaner that has been with this particular couple for 10 years. However, this is a ridiculous story, in my opinion, and I'm going to read what it says, and you guys can make up your mind as to whether you believe anything or whether you believe the veracity of the story or whatever. But anyway, I think it accidentally reveals something that many have probably suspected but didn't have proof of. And the piece, I believe, was clearly written to do a specific job because Australia just happened. It was very successful. Harry and Meghan have dominated the global news cycle for days and days on end, even days after they've arrived home in Montecito. They had a welcome sign banner welcoming them back to their home, and still the press is still in meltdown about them. We know that the emotional support pole has been deployed. The crash outs have been filed and are still being filed. And now someone has decided that what the moment requires is a leaked morning routine for the other girl that establishes her as simple, disciplined, and elegant, in contrast to whatever narrative is dominating the news right now about the Sussexes. So basically, they say she is simple, disciplined, elegant. Great. So what is the morning routine? So apparently, this is her morning routine, right? So she wakes up between, this is the other girl, by the way, she wakes up between 6 and 6:30 in the morning, and she sits by the window with a cup of hot tea in 5 minutes of absolute silence. Yes. Sitting there with a cup of tea in the morning, no phone, no distractions, just silence, alone. That's what they said. She then washes her face, brushes her hair, applies argan oil from The Ordinary. And we know argan oil from The Ordinary, it retails for approximately £5. Yeah, because they want to let us know she's not extravagant or anything like that. She then does her makeup, applies concealer and blush, and she is still alone. Then she does an hour of exercise. She does yoga. She does CrossFit. She runs, tennis, or even weights. And then breakfast. Remember what I said? I did a video about them saying about oats, remember, a few videos ago. And when I remember with Diana, the last time they kept banging on about her health routine and how healthy she is, she was in the throes of an eating disorder. I am not implying that is the same with the other girl. I am not. I am just drawing on the parallels. But anyway, her breakfast, oatmeal or a green smoothie with kale, spinach, matcha, spirulina, and blueberries. Yes. And then she often shares the moment with the children before taking them to school. Often, not always. And not with the other brother at the breakfast table. Because to many people who read this story, that is a massive and glaring omission. Because remember, there's a video that I did yesterday where Meghan said they all have lunch together. Remember? I knew something was going to come out as a counter, whatever. But anyway, there was no mention of the other brother at any point in this description of the other girl's morning. The other brother is not even mentioned at all. There is no waking up beside her. There is no him making her the cup of tea, no breakfast with the children, not even doing the school run. Not even mentioned in passing as someone who exists in the same physical space as the morning routine they have described. For me and for many others who read this piece, it sounds like the description of a woman who is living alone with her children. I am not saying she is. It could very well be rumor, but at the end of the day, that is what it sounds like. And as you can imagine, these sycophants, they write these puff pieces and they don't think things through clearly. They write them thinking, yep, embiggening article, embiggening story, and boom. Now, this particular piece is sourced, which is a massive change from the usual unnamed sources, sources close to, friends of, royal expert this, royal insider that, whatever, or senior courtier or courtier, whatever. This particular piece actually cites a lady called Anne Simmons, a former palace cleaner who worked at Buckingham Palace for over 10 years, and she is being cited as the authority on the other girls' morning routine. But here is the thing. The other girl does not live at Buckingham Palace. She lives at Adelaide Cottage, Anma Hall, Forest Lodge, whatever. I know they've got multiple places, and I know every place they move to is their forever home. And I believe the last place was Forest Lodge. So who knows? So basically, the sourcing, we don't know if it's invented. We don't know if the routine is invented. We do not know. But we do know that this particular story has been sourced. But the person it is sourced to, I don't know. Maybe when she stopped cleaning at Buckingham Palace, maybe she moved with her family. We do not know, because I always like to be fair in my speculations. However, she is said to have been a cleaner at Buckingham Palace for 10 years. That's all I'm going to say about that. You can draw your own conclusions. And maybe this whole piece could be a work of promotional fiction, a bit of an embiggening campaign to establish the other girl as grounded and relatable and disciplined at a moment when they need a contrast with Meghan's Australian tour and maybe the coverage that Meghan and Harry were generating from the Australian tour. I believe that coverage may have become uncomfortable because the more the Sussexes are seen to succeed, the more they are seen to work without taking any money from the taxpayers, the more problematic it is for the institution. In fact, I believe Harry himself, he said that him and Meghan existing outside of that institution is a threat in itself. Yes. And also, there have been people saying things like, oh, the royal family, they missed a trick by letting Harry and Meghan go. Look at how incredible they are. Look at what they can do. Blah, 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 blah. And certain people in that family do not want to hear things like that. Because the last time they did a tour, it was an unmitigated disaster. So I firmly believe that maybe this is another fan fiction to try and embiggen the other girl. And unfortunately, what it accidentally established is that apparently the other girl wakes up alone, sits in silence alone, exercises alone, and sometimes is accompanied by her children at breakfast. Because there is no adult partner visible, there is no other brother, there's no shower mentioned either, because I would have thought, that would have been part of the routine, but hey, I don't know. And of course, there was nothing mentioned about feet. Does she do manicure, pedicure? We do not know. But we can see from photographs from Getty Image that the nails and the feet seem to be neglected. To be fair, not everyone does nails and feet. My feet are terrible. My nails, I try to do when I can. But the feet, So, but my point is, though, that at the end of the day, I think we're going to see a lot more embiggening articles, but unfortunately, there's not a lot to work with because they are still on holiday. But we might see them. I think we might see them on Anzac Day. Yeah, we might see them on Anzac Day. So yeah, who knows? But anyway, let me have your thoughts, please. My name's Elizabeth. I'm the author of The Luxpreneur. And for more insights like these, please like, share, comment, and make sure you hit the subscribe button, please. You need to get me to 100,000 subscribers. Yes, you need to. Because you've made me think big, so it's all your fault. But anyway, to support my work in holding truth to power, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Elizabeth Solaru, or you can get a copy of my book, The Luxpreneur, from Amazon, Waterstones, or Barnes & Noble.
The $1 million rejection that redefines the narrative. A crucial detail emerges from the coverage of Meghan's Australian engagement that fundamentally undermines every cynical interpretation that has circulated about her visit. Max Markson, a prominent Australian celebrity PR agent, had previously offered Meghan $1 million and a private jet to visit Australia for 2 commercial events. She declined. This single fact, buried in the reporting, deserves to be brought into sharp focus because it exposes the central flaw in the cash machine narrative that dominated headlines. The argument being advanced by major outlets is that Harry and Meghan came to Australia primarily to exploit their royal proximity for financial gain, with their philanthropic work serving merely as cover for a mercenary operation. Yet the public record shows that when someone offered Meghan exactly what the cynical narrative claims she was chasing, $1 million for minimal commitment, she said no. Not, let us discuss, not, we will consider it, but a straightforward refusal. 4 years later, she returned on a commercial Qantas flight and spent 4 days visiting a children's hospital, a women's shelter, Indigenous veterans ceremonies, mental health charities, and shooting survivors, while delivering 2 keynote speeches and announcing an international sports festival for wounded veterans, largely without commercial compensation. The Her Best Life retreat and one-off investment provided some revenue, certainly, but the total commercial value generated on this tour fell substantially short of the $1 million sitting on the table that she rejected. The question the $1 million offer answers is not whether Meghan wanted to profit from Australia, but rather what her presence is actually worth in commercial terms. And the fact that she walked away from it to do substantive work instead reveals everything about her priorities and contradicts the machine's predetermined judgment. The $1 million offer that revealed everything. Max Markson, a prominent celebrity PR agent operating in Australia, had previously extended a substantial offer to Meghan, $1 million and the use of a private jet in exchange for her participation in 2 commercial events. She declined the offer outright, without negotiation or counter-proposal. This single detail, buried within The Guardian's coverage of the Australian tour, fundamentally undermines the ATM tour narrative that has dominated headlines throughout the week. The offer was straightforward and lucrative, the kind of proposition that, if Meghan's primary motivation were financial extraction, would have been impossible to refuse. Yet she refused it. She did not request revised terms. She did not ask for time to consider. She simply said no to $1 million and a private jet, choosing instead to return to Australia years later on a commercial Qantas flight in business class to spend 4 days visiting hospitals, shelters, and community organisations without the guaranteed financial cushion that had been offered to her. This refusal stands as the most powerful evidence against the cynical framing that has defined media coverage of her visit, because it demonstrates that when given the choice between easy money and substantive engagement, Meghan chose the latter. and in doing so exposed the fundamental dishonesty of a press apparatus determined to portray her unfavourably regardless of her actions. The ATM tour narrative. How media outlets weaponise commercial framing. The narrative that dominated coverage of the Australian tour, a story of calculated financial extraction wrapped in a thin veneer of charitable concern, was constructed with remarkable consistency across Britain's most prominent news organisations. The Daily Mail, The Telegraph, the BBC and The Guardian all seized upon the grifter framing, a unified messaging strategy that transformed 4 days of substantive community engagement into something far more sinister in their collective telling. What made this framing particularly potent was its implication that the philanthropic work, the hospital visits, the women's shelter, the mental health charity partnerships, the Invictus sailing event, were nothing more than elaborate window dressing, calculated optics designed to obscure what these outlets insisted was the tour's true purpose, extracting maximum commercial value from royal adjacent status. The machine had decided its story, and it would not be moved by inconvenient details. Yet buried within The Guardian's own coverage was a detail that fundamentally undermined this entire argument, a fact so damaging to the ATM narrative that it warranted extraction from its obscure placement and repositioning where it could do the work it was always meant to do, revealing not what Harry and Meghan came to Australia to take, but what they had deliberately refused. The rejected offer contradicts the cash grab narrative. The evidence that undermines this entire ATM tour argument is straightforward and damning. Meghan could have accepted Max Markson's $1 million offer and departed Australia in 48 hours, yet she chose a fundamentally different path. Instead of taking the private jet and the guaranteed 7 figures, she spent 4 days engaged in substantive community work, visiting a children's hospital, meeting with women's shelter residents, attending an Indigenous veterans ceremony and participating in mental health charity events and Bondi shooting survivor gatherings. The irony is inescapable. If commercial extraction were truly the goal, the math would have been elementary. 2 events, $1 million, done. No hospital crowds, no women's shelters, no Scar Tree Walk, no community sessions. But Meghan walked away from that deal and returned years later to do the actual work instead. What revenue the tour did generate, from the Her Best Life retreat and one-off investment announcements, amounted to considerably less than the figure she had already rejected. The woman who turned down a guaranteed $1 million and a private jet ended up breaking even on a 4-day trip that delivered the largest hospital engagement crowd Victoria Ward had ever witnessed, and a standing ovation from 300 women. That simple fact demolishes the entire premise that this was a cynical cash operation. The money was offered. She declined it, and in its place she chose 4 days of genuine substantive engagement with Australian communities instead. The 4 days of actual work. Over the course of 4 days, Meghan and Harry engaged in substantive on-the-ground work across multiple Australian communities and causes. They visited a children's hospital where Victoria Ward witnessed the biggest crowd such an engagement had ever drawn, and a women's shelter demonstrating a commitment to vulnerable populations. They attended an Indigenous veterans ceremony at the Australian War Memorial, participated in a mental health charity event, met with Bondi shooting survivors to offer support and solidarity, and attended an Invictus sailing event that showcased adaptive sports for wounded veterans. Beyond these in-person engagements, they also made free appearances, performing on MasterChef without compensation and delivering the Inter-Edge keynote at no cost, choosing to contribute their time and platform to causes rather than extract commercial value from them. This was not a schedule designed to maximize profit. It was a schedule designed to deliver genuine, substantive engagement with Australian communities, the kind of work that cannot be rushed through a private jet in 2 days, the kind of work that requires presence and attention and the willingness to show up even when there is no financial incentive to do so. The commercial reality of the Australian engagement, the Her Best Life retreat, generated modest revenue that covered the team's travel costs and little more. Yet this modest commercial activity has been weaponized by critics who seem determined to paint the entire tour as a money-grabbing exercise, regardless of the actual evidence. The one-off investment announcement represented genuine commercial activity, a legitimate business venture that deserves acknowledgement as such. But when one examines the numbers with any degree of honesty, the picture that emerges is strikingly different from the ATM tour narrative that has dominated headlines. The total revenue generated across all commercial activities on this 4-day visit fell conspicuously short of the $1 million offer she rejected years earlier, an offer that came with a private jet and required only 2 days of her time. Yet she walked away from it entirely. This is the crucial detail that recalibrates everything. Meghan could have extracted far more commercial value from Australia by simply accepting what was already on the table. Yet she chose instead to return years later and do the work, breaking even on a trip that included substantive engagement with hospitals, shelters and communities across the country. What the offer reveals. The $1 million offer from Max Markson was not made lightly or speculatively. Celebrity PR agents do not distribute such substantial fees without rigorous calculation of return on investment, and the figure itself served as market validation of Meghan's commercial value at that precise moment in time. $1 million represented what the marketplace determined her presence at 2 Australian events was worth before she ever set foot on the country's soil. Yet here lies the crucial distinction that dismantles the ATM narrative. She declined it. Not with conditions or counteroffers, but with an outright refusal. She chose instead to return years later on a commercial flight, to spend 4 days with children in hospitals and survivors of violence and rural young people struggling with mental health, to announce a new international sports festival for wounded veterans at the Australian War Memorial. The Her Best Life retreat and one-off affiliate commissions generated modest revenue, enough to cover the costs of flying a 9-person team across the world and back, nothing more. This was considerably less than the $1 million sitting on the table, waiting. If the objective were maximum commercial extraction, the mathematics of the choice become irrefutable. Take the private jet, take the $1 million, execute 2 events, depart in 2 days with the cash secured. Instead, she walked away from the easy money and returned to do the actual work. The impossible standard. The cruel irony embedded in this entire narrative is that there exists no scenario in which Meghan's actions receive media benediction. Had she accepted Markson's $1 million offer, the easy money, the private jet, the 2-day sprint in and out of Australia, the same outlets currently wielding the ATM accusation would have pivoted seamlessly to decrying her as a mercenary, a charlatan cashing in on royal proximity for a quick commercial payday. Instead, she rejected the straightforward path to maximum profit and returned years later to invest 4 days in genuine community engagement. Hospital visits, shelter support, veteran ceremonies, mental health advocacy. Yet this deliberate rejection of easy money, this tangible demonstration of commitment to substantive work over commercial extraction, somehow transmutes into the very charge she avoided. The media's assessment reveals its own impossible standard. There is no version of Meghan's choices that the machine approves of, because the machine has already determined its verdict. The $1 million she declined becomes the very proof of her authenticity, the evidence that when confronted with the choice between maximum extraction and meaningful engagement, she selected the latter. And still the narrative persists that she came to Australia as an ATM operation, even though she walked away from an actual $1 million to do something far more valuable than money could measure.